In the Mediterranean Sea, drones attacked a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker, reportedly with a Moscow GRU general on board, and in Moscow a few days later another one was blown up. Will this affect the mental state of the Kremlin leadership, and will the consequences of these eliminations be felt at the front? From the Kharkiv region all the way to Zaporizhzhia. In more than half a dozen Ukrainian cities, intense close-quarters battles are currently raging amid dense urban development. Our defenders must respond to the enemy's actions, everything necessary so that the outcome of the confrontations was in Ukraine's favor, as well as the security guarantees offered by partner countries to Kyiv to prevent a repeat of Russian aggression in the future. But when those preventive mechanisms with their algorithms will actually start working remains to be seen. Hello everyone. This is the latest operational review project from the editorial team of Spetskor. To understand the geography of the front, as usual, we will be using an online map. DeepStat map, whose use in the program has been authorized by the resources developers and a guest correspondent. Today, our guest is a veteran of the Russian-Ukrainian war, volunteer and former commander of the Mechanized Company of Combat Armored Vehicles of the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade, Mykola Melnyk. Mr. Mykola, welcome and thank you very much for finding the time to join us.
Thank you for having me and thank you for the invitation.
Let's start the program by talking about what, according to its creator's logic, let's put it that way, was supposed to and should protect Ukraine from a repeat of Russian aggression. All of last week, in various formats and for a long time on both sides of the Atlantic, Ukrainian, European, and American envoys in different configurations were devising and drafting security guarantees that partner countries can and, most importantly, are ready to provide to Ukraine. Overall, the current version of the security guarantees package supposedly includes a so-called three-tier plan. According to this document, European allies will continue to provide Kyiv with weapons, equipment, and will conduct training. In the post-war period, Washington will provide intelligence and carry out monitoring, tracking any intentions to violate the peace along the line of demarcation and the borders. This includes in particular possible Russian Federation operations under a false flag. If you remember, US Army Secretary Andrei Skol, while in Kyiv, promised to create the most technologically advanced and powerful demilitarized zone in the world in eastern Ukraine. At the same time, the Ukrainian army, with a strength of 800,000, is to become the first line of defense in the event of renewed aggression, and it will have to take the first blow. The Allies, meanwhile, will immediately employ all diplomatic means to resolve the situation. But if these efforts do not yield results within a few days, Ukraine's partners must provide Ukraine with military assistance on land, in the air, at sea, and in cyberspace, including resources from the United States. Directly in repelling the aggression, it is likely that a European contingent from a coalition of willing countries could be involved. In peacetime, these soldiers will be stationed at a considerable distance from the line of demarcation, serving as an additional, so to speak, element of deterrence. And quite literally. Recently, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated that several European countries have allegedly indicated that, if necessary, they are ready to send their troops to Ukraine. Mykola, all these algorithms, schemes and means that are being proposed as security guarantees for Ukraine, do you think they are capable of effectively preventing a possible renewed attempt at Muscovite aggression?
Not in any way. We have to realize that if there are no Europeans and Americans standing between the Ukrainian and Russian armies, then their guarantees are worthless. Nothing. That is the military assistance that is guaranteed in case something happens. Well, okay, now we'll be dancing around the phrase, trying to figure out what was actually meant by that word. Military assistance. So if we simply... If there will be... If these agreements stated that in the event of a renewed attack, France, Germany and the United Kingdom promised to deploy certain corps of the Air Force, Navy, infantry, then that would actually mean something. Otherwise, it's just the usual empty talk that Ukraine has been hearing from its Western partners for the past 30 years.
Before any guarantees, even hypothetical ones, can take effect, obviously, the most important thing must happen first. It must stop the ongoing Moscow aggression. In your opinion, honestly, who or what can actually stop the Russian dictator right now? Sanctions, military force, and here it's important to understand separately. Are Ukraine's defense forces capable of doing this on their own and stopping him, or is it some combination of forces?
As long as the Russians have the ability to advance, even if only on horseback, there will be no peace. The ceasefire brings us closer to that. only the destruction of the enemy's forces, resources, and manpower. So the key to a ceasefire, and I don't believe in peace, now lies in the hands of the defense forces.
From the battlefield of political and diplomatic maneuvers, let's move directly to the line of combat contact, where since the beginning of September and up to now, there hasn't been a single day on the front when the number of engagements dropped below 150. On peak days, this figure even reaches 250. And that's considering that about 60% of the entire war now consists of this. Currently, these are strikes by remotely piloted aerial systems, or RPAS, with an operational tactical range. We're talking about 20 to 30 kilometers. For most of these systems, this is now a completely routine working distance. Some UAVs can fly 50 and some even 100 kilometers. At the same time, there has been a noticeable increase at the front throughout, I would say, November and already December. The percentage of direct infantry combat engagements has risen. First and foremost, this is due to certain factors. By the fact that around Huliaipol, Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad, on the outskirts of Kostantynivka, in Siversk, and apparently soon in Lyman and Kupiansk, very intense firefights are breaking out literally every day. One of the critical areas where the relentless intensity of both enemy aerial attacks and ground assaults never truly decreases is the strategically vital Kostantynivka defense sector, a crucial front line. Ukrainians are holding both flanks there, in the northeast near Chasiv Yar, along the H-32 highway in the southeast, on both sides in fact, while facing relentless pressure from the Russians coming from the south, roughly speaking from the direction of Toretsk. Right now we are talking about a truly vast and expansive area, which is mainly confined. I would say, conditionally speaking, it's quite limited. As of today, it is confined on the east by the Kryvyi Torets River, which runs from the village of Klibanbyk past Pleshchivka, Ivanopilia, Nelipivka, and reaches all the way to Santorinivka. This is actually the southernmost district of Kostantynivka, and right now it almost exactly follows the line of contact on the western edge of this vast area. On the east, all of this is confined by the H-32 highway, and further south, this vast sector with a total area of about 80 square kilometers lies entirely in the southeast. This is the border, so to speak, a line that runs from Nelipivka through Oleksandr Motornyi and extends beyond the eastern outskirts of Stuposhki. So in fact, this entire, the gray area, so to speak, this whole gray territory is being attacked simultaneously from the southeast, just as before. Up to a dozen separate and distinct tank and motorized rifle battalions, specifically drawn mainly from the ranks of the Rashid 3rd Combined Arms Army, comprising the 8th Combined Arms Army, and also the 3rd Army Corps. Along three main axes, along three main directions already following, the aforementioned Kryvyi Torets River towards the southeastern outskirts along the 005-19 highway, which runs from Bilahora through Oleksandr Motornyi and actually leads to the city center of Kostantynivka. And directly along the N32 highway, the Russians, I would say, with raid-like actions using small infantry groups, are trying to crawl forward and gain a foothold in the southeastern part of Kostantynivka. At the same time, it should be said that our soldiers are not just sitting in defense here. Just the other day, they managed to carry out a series of effective counterattacks generally aimed toward Prytashini. And they managed to push the Russians back somewhat in this area, south of the already mentioned N32 highway. At the same time, in the southwest, it seems that the Klibanbytske reservoir is currently serving as the line of contact, and in fact, the front line now runs along it. Fighting is still ongoing today for the settlement of Klibanbyk, but the Russians, mainly the 4th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade with support from units from the regiments of the 150th Motorized Rifle Division, are trying to outflank this reservoir from the east, once again attacking in the direction of Pleshchivka. At the same time, along the H-20 highway, from Yablunivka and Oleksandr Kalinove, the Russian 225th, the 1219th Motorized Rifle Regiment from another, the 20th Motorized Rifle Division of the 8th Combined Arms Army, is trying to bypass the Klibanbytske reservoir from the west and reach the commanding height over the area. 213th, which in my opinion, as we've said many times, is significant. This will determine the success of long-term defense. Kostantynivka. At the same time, the main forces of that same 20th Motorized Rifle Division, the Russian one, which are operating together with some units of the Russian Marine Corps, attacking from the west in the area from Sofiivka to Russian Yar and along the highway. The N-32 is trying to push from the west onto, so to speak, this entire area, the Kostantynivka defensive district of the Ukrainians. A few details about how events are unfolding, particularly on the eastern flank from Kostantynivka in the area of Chasiv Yar. I hope we now have the opportunity to hear firsthand. Alpha, commander of the Unmanned Aerial Systems Company of the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade. We have King Danilo on the line with the studio. Alpha, greetings to you.
Good afternoon.
Before I ask any questions, I'd like to draw viewers' attention to the QR code. This is a fundraiser for drones and components for the Strike Reconnaissance Unit of the Moskvat of the 24th Royal Brigade. It goes without saying what they're capable of. Our UAV operators, given sufficient resources, can do a lot, so if you can, please don't stay on the sidelines, support Ukraine's defenders. Alpha, let's get back to our conversation. First of all, I'll ask as clearly and directly as possible. Are the Ukrainian Defense Forces present right now at this very moment in Chasiv Yar? And at the same time, are there enemy attempts from the eastern flank, from the side of the completely destroyed town, to break through to Kostantynivka? The units...
The defense forces present in Chasiv Yar are holding the line. Defense can be both maneuverable and positional, meaning without the enemy advancing deeper into our battle formations. But the enemy is currently taking full advantage of the situation, the weather conditions. Now there are fogs, and it's impossible. Sometimes it's impossible to fly those same drones, or the loss rate of those drones increases sharply.
Has the ongoing conflict around Chasiv Yar as a whole become significantly more intense during the month of December compared to all previous months? Or is everything staying at the same level, at the same pace?
For them, it's a conveyor belt. I know that only the enemy's units are rotating, the units are changing. They are being rotated, replaced, but lately I've seen that the quality of the enemy's personnel has decreased. In terms of what specialties, I'm figuring it out by tags, it's that the enemy has started to surrender more, has less motivation to fight. And it is clear that the units have changed. Why? Because it is often seen that the soldiers who attack and carry out actions are not trained. That is, they move forward, they get stuck, a drone flies into them, that's all. He lies down under a tree resting. This is the maximum that is happening now.
What's actually going on with Kostantynivka right now? It's a complete wasteland. Is it already, or is there still, so to speak, some life lingering there?
There are indeed many innocent civilians present there, although personally I truly do not fully comprehend or understand the reasons why they are there. The number of drones is large enough that you shouldn't even go there in armored vehicles. There are a lot of people just waiting around, and the enemy doesn't limit themselves to striking only armored vehicles. So the white delivery vans are currently being hit quite frequently. Well, civilian cars, they utterly and completely destroy civilian vehicles. The destruction of pickups, clearly recognizable. Vehicles belonging to servicemen, now it's the destruction of literally anything that moves. And it doesn't even have to be a vehicle. I
understand, Alpha. Thank you very much for finding the time to answer a few questions. Please take care of yourself and your soldiers.
Thank you.
Mykola, it's clear that the fighting for Kostantynivka is already ongoing, particularly from the south. At the same time, the Ukrainian defense in the Chasiv Yar area, at least for now, has not been withdrawn. And in fact, from the southwest, even despite some enemy advances, we definitely do not have a breakthrough by the occupiers. Tell me, under these circumstances, can it be successful? Can the long-term defense of Kostantynivka be successful, and what is needed for that, in your opinion?
For this, first, you need a lot of echelon defense. Second, technical and material support. Third, people, let's say, not just officers, but any soldier, plus the rational use of the limited resource of the soldiers themselves to offset the lack of experience, repelling positions that in fact were lost a week ago already. As for the defense of Kostantynivka, based on the overall layout, the terrain relief, it is absolutely possible and can be sustained for a long time.
In your opinion, what is the main direction of enemy attacks in the sector? I understand that the General Staff has their own information, but based on what we have, these are frontal assaults from the south. Do you think there will still be attempts at flanking maneuvers by the Marine forces? Will the 20th, for example, not waste their resources here on frontal assaults? Same here.
My answer depends on what is currently located in the Siversky direction, because reserves will be redeployed directly there. Our defense forces, unfortunately, cannot establish a long-term foothold there after the Russians were able to force their way in Seversky Donetsk. Accordingly, there is already a question of organizing defense, Slavic. This is also a very big task. Accordingly, the Russians will be transferring reserves there. Here, there will be one simple objective, either to encircle Kostantynivka from several flanks, or to attempt to enter through the southern outskirts of this suburb. That's it. There's really nothing else you can come up with here. Trying to storm through the open field is completely pointless. There's a significant elevation there. The elevation difference
is about 70 meters.
A bit more, if I remember correctly. So, accordingly, the defense near Chasiv Yar, that is the eastern flank, is holding fairly well. As far as I remember, that's a good thing. Finally, the constant shuffling of brigades between the operational tactical groups has stopped there. Accordingly, there are brigades there that have been deployed for more than a year, and they possess significant experience and in principle have the technical capabilities and resources to withstand the enemy's forces. That's why the defense here looks quite promising.
You know, from what you're saying, I get the impression that Kostantynivka, in this whole picture, in the attempts of the Russians to capture Donetsk region, could actually become almost a key stage, considering the flanking maneuvers from the Siversk, Sloviansk, Lyman directions, Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. Under these circumstances, do you think there is a chance, a possibility to hold on to the 23 to 25% of Donetsk region that we currently control, at least until spring, when there is cautious hope that Moscow's economy might go into a tailspin? Do such chances exist?
They are absolutely justified. That is, even on the Siversky direction, the main issue is the rapid construction of a new line of fortified defensive structures. That's it, they can be built starting from Ryhorod and then down along the heights. Southward along the heights. And that's all.
In skies saturated with drones, is it really possible to build this?
To finish building
the line?
Look, for now, they are still 30 kilometers away from the Boyazitna line. I'm talking about that line, about those heights that begin before Sloviansk, as far as I remember. It's difficult under such conditions, but it's possible. Everything to the east there, building new fortifications won't work anymore because it's only 15 kilometers to the Boyazit line, and accordingly even drones won't be able to do anything there. Therefore, we must recognize where we can draw this line, calmly consolidate, and calmly prepare for defense. Well, there's no panic, there's no problem with the enemy breaking through our defensive line, Roskontinskaya. The military command needs to figure out why this happened. But there is no catastrophe, and the enemy will definitely not take it. Not even until summer. I don't think that even in 26 he will be able to take Slavyansk.
There's another section of the front I would like to draw attention to today. Well, actually, it's simply impossible not to pay attention to it. This is, of course, the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration, where the concentration of combat clashes has remained the highest along the entire front for a month in a row. The very first and perhaps the most important feature of this section right now is that there is no clearly defined line of contact as such. That is, this section stretches, roughly speaking, from Molodetsky in the west and all the way to Rodensky in the far northeast, including both Pokrovsk and, in fact, Myrnohrad, these two significant cities which are quite important and strategically located. Instead, there is a vast interpositional space here, again, almost along the entire perimeter of the mentioned line. And this interpositional space is the so-called gray zone, which in some places reaches up to 10 kilometers wide. And considering that the strike zone with drones It extends another 10 kilometers deep into the Ukrainian operational enemy rear. So in fact, this territory, almost 30 kilometers wide on average, is the very area where the battle for Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad is currently taking place, as well as for all the surrounding settlements. The distinctive feature of section number 2, in my opinion, is that most of the combat clashes today fighting here is taking place among the ruins of dense buildings and infrastructure. The structural residential areas are simply being ground down by the Russians with aerial bombs and artillery, any structure that could serve as shelter for our pilots or our infantry. And only then do Russian infantrymen enter these individual streets or even specific buildings. The main sector, directly in the main sector of the war, directly in Pokrovsk, is the western, northwestern, and northeastern outskirts of the city districts, in particular with two significant Russian incursions that were directed toward the Dynas neighborhood, which is already situated north of the main railway line and the local meat processing plant, a key industrial facility. Here, as before, the main forces of Russia's 2nd and 41st Combined Arms Armies are attacking. More precisely, I would say some of their forces, because part of them, particularly from the 41st Army, have been redeployed. Specifically in the direction of the village of Rivne towards Ivana Mazepi Street and towards the local meat processing plant, the Moscow-based 506th, 1441st, and 1375th Motorized Rifle Regiments of the aforementioned armies are attacking. These are all units that are actively engaged. In the northeastern district, at the same time, in the northwestern and western parts, the Russians have already deployed, according to information, the full strength of all three regiments, 104th, 234th, 237th, and the 175th Reconnaissance Battalion of the 76th Division, of the Airborne Assault Division, which was redeployed here from the Zaporizhzhia direction. It should be noted separately that Ukrainian soldiers here are not just sitting in passive defense. In particular, the day before, a series of effective counterattacks by Ukrainian defenders, particularly mechanized counterattacks, notably in the area of the western industrial zone of Pokrovsk, managed, at least situationally, to push the Russians back somewhat to the south of the AM30 Donetsk-Pavlohrad highway. As for the city of Myrnohrad, even the most recent and optimistic open-source intelligence reports now clearly show the entire urban area. It is depicted as a complete and utter gray zone, 100% entirely uncontrolled by either warring side, with no definitive presence from either faction. This means that danger could be lurking behind any street, behind any building. At the same time, the Ukrainian General Staff insists that Ukrainian soldiers, in particular the 38th Separate Marine Brigade, are currently present in the northern and central parts of the city and continue to repel enemy assaults. But in my opinion, and I want to emphasize that this is my personal view, this is one of those cases where it's more of a problem than an achievement, because all the routes connecting to the city, all the roads, right now they're nothing but a deadly race against enemy drones, which are literally circling by the hundreds, both over the city itself and over any logistical route for delivering ammunition, people, and so on. The Russia's 9th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, with the support of 3 regiments from the 51st Combined Arms Army, is attacking Myrnohrad from the north through Krasny Lyman and from Novokonomishny from the east. Meanwhile, the 5th Russia's Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, also from the 51st Combined Arms Army, is operating south of the N32 highway, as mentioned earlier today, and these remain the main forces currently. You're attacking Myrnohrad. Here, just like in Pokrovsk, there is no clear line of contact. The positions are mixed up as well. Meanwhile, the Syriac area, which we already mentioned today, stretches out from south to north all the way to Rodensk and the branch of the TO 515 road toward Khrayshyn. To the east, it extends beyond the eastern outskirts of the city toward Novokonomishny. And to the west, it covers the entire area between the N32 highway and the railway embankment up to the stop, platform 394 kilometers. Most sources also refer to this entire area as a continuous gray zone. And a few details, some specifics perhaps, about what is currently happening around Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. I hope we now have the opportunity to hear from the head of the communications department of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Colonel Volodymyr Polivy is connected to the Spetskor studio. Mr. Volodymyr, greetings to you.
Good afternoon.
As usual, before I ask any questions, I direct viewers to the QR code. It is already on your screens. This is a fundraiser for aerial drones and NLAW for the soldiers of the 7th Corps of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces, airborne piloted platforms, right now for sure. Weapon number 1 on the NATO front around Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. So please do not stay on the sidelines, help our defenders. Mr. Volodymyr, first of all, once again, I'll ask you directly about the defense forces of Ukraine. As of this moment, are they present in Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad? Or is the fighting already taking place on the northern and western outskirts of both cities?
Yes, the defense forces are present in both of the settlements you mentioned, both in Pokrovsk and in Myrnohrad. They are carrying out their assigned tasks there.
Tell me, is there currently a direct line of combat engagement in Pokrovsk itself? It's a relative concept. Our positions and observation posts are intermingled with those of the Russians. Then the question is, how do you fight under such conditions?
You know, in Pokrovsk, such a notional line does exist, and it runs along the railway, which divides the city from west to east. So it turns out that the northern side of the city, the northern part, is under the control of the defense forces. But in certain places, the positions of our units and the enemy are indeed mixed together. They look like isolated pockets of defensive lines or like layers in a puff pastry. And what do urban battles look like there? Urban combat is the most difficult type of fighting, but this mainly applies to the attacking side. That is, the defending side still has certain advantages. We are in a defensive position, we are holding the line, but due to a lack of forces and the enemy's advantages, mainly in manpower, the situation remains very difficult.